I'm floored by everybody's reception. I'm so happy to see so many people here. We'll have a little bit of time to get acquainted. I've been criticized for speaking in 50-minute blocks because I'm a teacher, but I've remedied that by planning on speaking for 3 hours today. So there'll be plenty of time for you I'll give you an intermission so you can do whatever you need to do. But thank you all for coming here, and I certainly appreciate the speakers, Reverend Copley, the former student, everybody. It's just, I don't know who you were talking about for a good chunk of that time, but thanks. You know, we're here at MacArthur Park, and over the years I've tried to have every interview or any type of formal press event within view of the Korean War Memorial behind me. And the reason that I choose to do this is it's a very personal reason. And I don't think I've ever explained why I've done that. I mean, the people that know me closely know that, but I'm going to let you in on that now. I don't think that I would be here, and I'm sure I wouldn't be here, if it wasn't for a colleague and friend and professor that I had in college named Jack Boyd, who was a Korean War veteran. Jack Boyd, he always called himself Uncle Jack. We called him Uncle Jack. He was just a phenomenal man. He started out life as a coal miner in western Pennsylvania, became a labor organizer in western Pennsylvania in the Rust Belt. He was drafted into the military, went and served in Korea, came back and on the GI Bill got an education and became just a fabulously extraordinary man. As I progressed through college, I found myself spending a lot more time with Jack out of the classroom. I would work with him as a field supervisor for the archaeology program. We did cultural resource management work together. And over time, I became his right-hand man. He became like a father to me, and I became like a son to him. One of the things that we'd often do is drive back and forth he had rental property in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we would spend hours in the vehicle, this dilapidated old Chevy pickup truck. And by sitting there with him, I learned more about life, and I learned more about myself as a person than I ever have before meeting him or after. He was an extraordinary man. He was a gruff, salt-of-the-earth kind of guy. And his knowledge came from a lived experience and not simply a textbook. His life was tempered by the struggles of the working class. And by his decency and generosity and his respect for humanity, I could see that by his example, that was how I wanted to show respect for my fellow man. I remember once we were doing a survey in the very impoverished portions of West Virginia, and we had stumbled across a rundown shack in the project area that we were surveying, and we really didn't give it a second thought, and we went on to continue our testing and our measuring and collecting data. And later that day we were going to our motel, and Jack said, you know, in his inimitable way that usually contained a lot of inappropriate language for a diverse group, let's stop at this store for a minute. So we stop at the market, and we go in, and we fill up 3 bags of groceries. And he says, let's go back to that shack. So we drive back there, and we drop those bags off there. He said, don't let those people see you do this. And he'd also put probably about $150, $200 in an envelope and stuck it in that bag. Jack changed the way that I view humanity. All right, don't know. That's not something to clap about. He taught me 2 really important lessons, decency and duty. Not only by his duty to his country during the Korean War through his military service, by duty to his fellow man. Jack would never admit to this, nor would he approve of me saying this, but he was truly his brother's keeper. All of us here have a similar obligation, and we're called to stand up for these basic virtues. Unfortunately, the virtues of decency and duty are rare in modern electoral politics. There are many elected officials that have forsaken these duties, or at least allowed them to be distracted or to be lulled into a distorted understanding of what their duty is and to whom their allegiance is owed. There are still others outside the realm of elected governance whose duty is to themselves alone. Unfortunately, this latter group has found themselves in a position to influence the former group, and their whole purpose is enriching themselves. So these two groups, the super wealthy donor class and the legislators that serve them, have a mutually beneficial relationship to one another. They have developed a kind of codependency on one another that neither of them are able or willing to break. And unfortunately, neither of these groups see themselves as anybody's keeper but their own, with little regard for anybody outside of their own exclusive relationship. When governance loses sight of its most basic responsibilities, we, the people, are led down a short route to chaos. When governance forgets the very people over whom they are charged to govern, where is the decency in that? President Theodore Roosevelt noted a similar circumstance well over 100 years ago, and he famously said that behind the ostensible government, the government that we see every day, the edifice of the Capitol and so forth, there stands an invisible government. And this invisible government owes no allegiance and acknowledges no responsibility to the people. I think this is a very apt description of the abuse of power that we're seeing in our post-Citizens United world. We are doomed to continue down this path of Ayn Randian exploitation of our political system, regressing backward in spirit and deed to the time of the robber barons of President Roosevelt's day. Maybe, perhaps, we as a unified people need to investigate and take a nobler path forward. I often tell my students at school, in one of my classes, it's a progressivism class, so we talk about progress quite a bit, that the idea of progress is that today should be better than yesterday, and tomorrow should be better than today. In almost every period of American history, we've seen this concept of progress hold true. And we see that with advances in racial, gender, and marriage equality, as well as labor reforms and reforms in education. These types of reforms are born of our desire to realize the fullness of the American promise, and are ours due largely to the activism of ordinary citizens like you and me. And these are ours because we demanded them. These reforms propelled our country forward. Tragically, today we see signs of regress. A new federal study shows us that for the first time, our life expectancy is actually declining. We see an ever-increasing chasm between the wealth of the rich and the poor. We see a widening achievement gap between the races. Also, though, now there is a growing distrust of the actual institution of a free press. And this distrust is being fomented by the very government charged with its protection. The integrity of our courts are frequently questioned by our government. The integrity of our intelligence community is frequently questioned by our government. The most shameful step backwards is the reality that American is being pitted against American with regard to national origin, ethnicity, and theology. This, too, is being perpetuated by our own government. Most progress-minded peoples of the world look towards the eradication of these types of destructive ideologies. We have stumbled backward in this regard. This is the work of the invisible government that President Roosevelt warned us of. A recent Princeton study found that for the past 30 years or so, the preferences and needs of the American people have had virtually no impact on governmental policy. In other words, our voices have been drowned out by those of large corporations and a small number of economic elites in the political donor class that have gained for themselves a stranglehold on virtually all policy coming out of Washington. Simply put, and this is the scary thing, when it becomes very clear that the real drivers of public policy are no longer the multitudes of we the people, but rather they the few, our claim to being a representative democracy is seriously threatened. Though still a representative democracy in theory, the United States has become an oligarchy in practice. This is not the political system that the Constitution established. This is not the political system for which untold numbers of Americans like Jack Boyd has fought. This is not the political system that untold numbers of Americans have died for. Evidence of this unfortunate and disturbing trend can be recognized by noting the disconnect between what we as Americans want and need and what actually is given to us by Congress. 66% of Americans want an increase to the minimum wage, but Congress doesn't act. Right on. 62% of Americans support free public college education, but Congress will not act. 70% of Americans want robust regulation of a financial system, but Congress will not act. 85% of Americans, Democrat and Republican alike, want campaign finance reform, but Congress will not act. 60% of Americans want universally guaranteed health coverage, such as a Medicare for All type program, but the Congress will not act. They have forsaken their duty to the American people. Who holds so much power over the Congress that they are unwilling or afraid to do the very will of the people that they are duty-bound and sworn to serve? This is the invisible government. Who makes up the invisible government, you might ask? The special interests in the economic elites, the billionaire donor class, the Wall Street banking cartel, the NRA. I'm told I should never say that in Arkansas. The NRA. The super PACs, the Club for Growth, and the Front for the Koch brothers' political agenda for us Americans, Americans for Prosperity. These are the invisible government. The Supreme Court has empowered these entities through its corporate-centric rulings, and in doing so has sown the seeds for the oligarchy and have reaped the demise of true representative democracy. The invisible government's policy priorities usually stand in stark contrast to what we as citizens actually want. I'm going to ask you a few questions. How many of you here today wanted to eradicate internet neutrality or to sell our internet browsing history without our set? Anybody? No? Nobody wanted that? How many of you wanted to make our privacy a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder? How many of you wanted to weaken the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau? How many of you wanted to roll back the fiduciary duty law protections that protect our savings and our retirement plans? How many of you wanted massive tax cuts to be given to the super wealthy? at the expense of social safety net programs for our most vulnerable, such as Meals on Wheels and food assistance. How many of you wanted the representatives of this state to roll out insulting and damaging health care proposals that would set up people with pre-existing conditions for financial ruin, to gut the Medicaid program, and to leave 32 million Americans without health care coverage? Nobody here? Good. You and I didn't want these things. These things were sired by the invisible government, and they were born of this Congress. When the puppet masters of the invisible government pull the strings, the Ryan House and the McConnell Senate leap into action. They're cowering before the invisible government, which dictates virtually all policy coming out of the Republican Congress. You see, after hundreds of millions of dollars of special interest money are poured into all of these congressional campaigns by wealthy donors, it's time for these congressmen to pay the piper. And there's only one demand that Americans for Prosperity has, and this is for tax cuts for the super wealthy. They have to come first. These tax cuts always have to come first. That is the priority. And these are the core values of Americans for Prosperity. These are the core values of the invisible government. And these values direct virtually all budget priorities regarding labor and education, and now we see today healthcare. So how do we know the extent to which our own legislators here in Arkansas share Americans for Prosperity's core values? Happily, Americans for Prosperity, they proudly maintain a handy scorecard that illustrates how obedient our legislators are to their policy demands. As it turns out, our current Arkansas 2nd District Representative, Representative Hill, has an Americans for Prosperity score of 100%. Unfortunately, Arkansas's entire congressional delegation, a congressional delegation that represents the second poorest state in the Union, has a 100% score from Americans for Prosperity, whose avowed mission is to funnel wealth to the economic elites by gutting programs that comprise the essence of a civil society. Real Americans will never prosper when Americans for Prosperity win. Okay? So now, if we truly want to move forward and make progress as a society, we must repudiate the demands of the donor class. We need to address the underlying causes of gross inequality in our society and fight for big ideas instead of these small token feel-good legislation that's often put forward to kind of distract us from the real issues and the real immorality of the invisible government's demand. The invisible government tells us that we're foolish to try to embrace these ideas, that we're naive. They tell us that it's normal, for example, for 1 in 4 seniors and 1 in 4 children in Arkansas to not know where their next meal's coming from. They tell us we don't understand the economics when we ask for a living wage. We're no longer asking for these things. We're going to demand them. They tell us we can't afford to strengthen Social Security, but we're no longer asking. We're going to demand this. They tell us that the government cast aside the war on poverty for a war on drugs, and they say this is the cause for all the violence on the streets. They don't acknowledge the fact of the role that poverty plays in this. And we want them to take very significant steps for the eradication of this economic inequality, but we're not asking for this equality anymore. We're demanding it. The invisible government tells us that anyone can succeed in America, but at the same time they refuse to strengthen public education. And they tell us that it's too much to ask to think that Americans could have debt-free higher education. But we're no longer asking for these, we're demanding. The invisible government tells us that we are foolish to even consider a guaranteed universal health care program like Medicare for all. They tell us that not every citizen deserves health care, and that if people want health care, that they'll be motivated to go out and get a better job. They tell us that every other industrialized developed country in the world is mistaken in guaranteeing their populations this type of universal health care. But we're no longer asking for universal health care. We're going to demand it. We're not demanding anything that shouldn't already be ours. So the first step to controlling this invisible government is simply acknowledging that it exists. It's time to stop pretending that child hunger, a vanishing middle class, increasing poverty are normal. These aren't normal. It's time for us to reject this false ideology. President Roosevelt concluded his observation by saying, "To destroy the invisible government, to befoul the unholy alliance between corrupt business and corrupt politics is the first task of the statesmanship of the day." This has to be our first task as well. Many Americans don't realize that our legislators today, right now, have it within their power to either enable this corrupt system or to disable it, to grovel before the feet of it or to fight it. Even if the Supreme Court won't reverse its rulings that have created the fertile ground on which special interest control of the electoral system has grown, individual legislators have it within their power to refuse to participate in this system and to choose a new path forward. The second step in controlling the invisible government is changing the types of people that we send to Congress. People who have a record of fighting the invisible government and not participating in it. I became involved in politics in 2010 because I was aghast at the Supreme Court's arrogance in their ruling with regards to the Citizens United case. That case allowed unlimited special interest money and spending in our elections, and it effectively muted our voices as everyday Arkansans and Americans. We formed a group and we named it after the Arkansas state motto, Regnat Populus, which means the people rule. All my political work on citizen-initiated ballot measures in collaboration with local and national democracy activists has been to promote the simple idea that we, the citizens, should be the ones that direct our political destiny. It's very simple. In my congressional campaign, I will not allow myself to become an indentured servant of the invisible government. I will only accept contributions from actual people because the United States representative should be beholden to the people of the United States. My election and my re-election will be solely in your hands. As long as we work to defeat each other, the less likely we can defeat the invisible government. As long as we are made to believe that it is imperative that we wage an unrelenting and unwinnable culture war on each other's values, the dystopian values of the invisible government are going to prevail. We must join together and show them that they cannot divide us. We must rise up and show them that Arkansans are no longer willing to vote against their best damn interests. Our right to the fullness of the democratic process, which is to elect individuals from our communities to represent our needs in Washington, is our birthright. This is the foundation of our representative democracy. Our voice in this process is our right. It's not given to us by the government. We are born with it. It is ours by virtue of our very humanity, a humanity humanity that is created in the image and likeness of God. Governments can only recognize this sacred right, or they can violate it, but they can't take it away. It's ours alone. We can't forget this, and we have to preserve this. We have to empower those people that have given into apathy and despair and have quit participating in the political process. We must demonstrate our intrinsic decency and never allow our sisters and brothers to doubt their value or their right to the fullness and opportunity that our great country and our great state have to offer. We're starting a new path forward, and it's being blazed by people all across the country and all across the state that are now stepping up and running for office because they want to change the status quo. We're seeing citizens hailing from just about every walk of life there possibly could be. They're rising up to run for Congress. Doctors, ranchers, farmers, teachers, pastors, community activists, they're all announcing a run for House or Senate or whatever office. And that's what we need. We need to stand up to the invisible government. Now, a cautionary warning. Make no mistake. The forces like Americans for Prosperity, they're going to bury our state in tons of money. They're going to fill your mailboxes with flyers talking about how unrealistic our values are. They're going to flood the airwaves with soul-crushing 30-second political ads. But there's no force that can stop us as we demonstrate to Washington why the motto of this state is "The people rule." Thank you very much.